Alright, so in this lesson we're going to discuss solving equations in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 by factoring. This is pretty much the same process as the last lesson we did on solving these types of equations, except now our a value is not going to be 1, which makes these a little bit more complicated. But let's go ahead and get right to it. So if we take a look at example A here, 2x squared plus 7x minus 2 equals 4x squared plus 4. The first thing we need to do is to set this equation equal to 0, which means that we need to take this 4x squared and this 4 and we need to move them over or get rid of them, right? So one way we can do that is by subtraction. So this is a positive 4x squared, so I'm going to subtract 4x squared, and this is a positive 4, so I'm going to subtract 4. And that will leave me with a 0 on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, I'm just going to line these up. So negative 4x squared comes under positive 2x squared, and negative 4 comes under negative 2. So now we're going to go ahead and combine like terms. So we got 2x squared minus 4x squared, that is negative 2x squared. The 7x stays just the way it is. We have negative 2 minus 4, that's negative 6. And now on the right hand side, all of this is now 0. So we have negative 2x squared plus 7x minus 6 equals 0. And now we need to factor. Well, the first thing is we notice that our a value is negative, and we don't want that. So we're going to factor out a negative 1. So we're going to do this. Okay. And negative 2x squared divided by negative 1 is positive 2x squared. Positive 7x divided by negative 1 is negative 7x. And negative 6 divided by negative 1 is positive 6. And now we need to go ahead and factor this. I'm going to go ahead and use the diamond method. So I'm going to draw my x here. All right. And remember, up here we put a times c, so we have 2 times 6, that's 12. Down here we put our b value, which is negative 7. And then over here we put our first term without the exponent, so 2x over something. Let me separate this a little bit here. And over here, 2x over something. Okay? And the way we find our denominators is by looking at this number 12 and this number negative 7. So we need two numbers that multiply together to make positive 12, and when you add them together you get negative 7, and that would be negative 3 times negative 4. So I'm going to say 2x over negative 3 and 2x over negative 4. Now over here, 2x over negative 3, that's already in simplest form, and 2x over negative 4, I could divide both of these by 2, which would give me x over negative 2. And so these are my binomials. So now over here I have negative 1 times 2x minus 3, it's my first binomial, times x minus 2, and that equals 0. Then we go to our zero product property. If a times b equals 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0, or both. So now we set up our two equations. So my first equation is going to be 2x minus 3 equals 0, and my second equation is going to be x minus 2 equals 0, and then we solve both of these equations. This first equation here, I have to add 3 to both sides. And this gives me 2x equals 3. And then when I divide by 2, I get x equals 3 over 2, or 1 and 1/2. Now, in the second equation, x minus 2 equals 0, I have to add 2 to both sides. And that gives me x equals 2. So those are my two possible solutions for x. 3 over 2, or 1 and 1/2, and 2. All right, this next example here, b. Let me go ahead and draw a little division line here. All right, so you can see this one is This one has a lot of steps to it, so let's get right to it. First, we're going to distribute. 3 times x squared is 3x squared. 3 times negative 1, that's negative 3, equals, we have here negative 3x squared plus 2x plus 5. Okay, and again, we need to set this equal to 0. So if I think of this as a magic bridge type situation, I want to take all of this and bring it over to this side of the equation, which will change the sign of everything. So if I rewrite it that way, it's going to look like this. First, I'm going to copy down this left side. So I have 3x squared minus 3, and now let's bring all of this over. This negative 3x squared becomes a positive 3x squared. This positive 2x becomes a negative 2x, and this positive 5 becomes a negative 5, and now all of that equals 0. And so when I combine like terms, I have here 3x squared plus 3x squared, that's 6x squared. I look over for my b value, negative 2x, there's no other x here, so minus 2x. And I look at my c values, I have negative 3 and negative 5, so minus 8, and that equals 0. So let's go ahead and go about the process of factoring now. Well, if I look at all three of these terms, they're all even, 6, negative 2, and negative 8, which means I can factor a 2 out of all of these terms. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. So 6x squared divided by 2, that's 3x squared. Negative 2x divided by 2, that's negative 1x. And negative 8 divided by 2, that's negative 4. That equals 0. And then we have to go ahead and go about the process of factoring here. And we're going to use the diamond method. Let me go ahead and put my x up here. Okay? So, in the top section, not AB, sorry, backwards, A times C, which in this case is 3 times negative 4. That's negative 12. In my bottom section, my B value, which is negative 1. And then on my left and right, I'm going to put 3x as my numerator and then look for my denominators. Okay? So now, I have to think of two numbers that multiply together to make negative 12. And when I combine them, I have negative 1. Remember, since this is a negative 12, that means one of these numbers is positive and the other is negative. And so we need the difference between these two numbers to be 1. That's how we end up with a negative 1. And so now that would be 4 times 3, because 4 minus 3 is 1, and 4 times 3 is 12. And since my b value is negative, the bigger number needs to be negative. So we're going to say negative 4 times positive 3. That gives me negative 12 for my AC, and that gives me negative 1 for my b value. So I have 3x over negative 4. This is already in simplest form. And I have 3x over 3. I can divide both parts of this by 3. This gives me x over 1. So now when I factor this, I have 2 times 3x minus 4 times x plus 1 equals 0. And now I want to set both of these equations to equal 0. So I have here 3x minus 4 equals 0, and I have x plus 1 equals 0. When I here 3x minus 4 equals 0, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. And that gives me 3x equals 4. And then when I divide that, when I divide everything by 3, let me put the answers over here in this box. Right? When I divide that by 3, I get x equals 4/3, or 1 1/3. Okay? Now over here, x plus 1 equals 0. I subtract 1 from both sides, and I get x equals 1. So my solutions are x equals 1 1/3, or x equals 1. All right, let's take a look at a few more examples. All right. So if I look at this example here, 2x squared plus 48x plus 45 equals 0, you can see that it's already set to 0, so we don't have to go through that process. But if I look at my three terms, 12x squared, 48x, and 45, all of these numbers are divisible by 3. So I can factor out a 3. I can divide everything by 3. So I'm going to say, okay, 3 times, okay, 12x squared divided by 3, that's 4x squared. 48x divided by 3, that's 16x. And 45 divided by 3, that's 15. So 3 times 4x squared plus 16x plus 15 equals 0. Next, we're going to go ahead and put our x so that we can use the diamond method. Okay, up top here, a times c, 4 times 15 is 60. Down here, my b value, which is 16. And over here, my 4x squared without the 2, right? Without the exponent of 2. So 4x over something, and over here, 4x over something. Now, what are two numbers that multiply together to make 60 and add together to make 16? And you guessed it, that would be 6 times 10. 6 times 10 is 60, and 6 plus 10 is 16. So now I have here 4x over 6. So there's no confusion here. 4x over 6, and I could divide both of these by 2. So I get 2x over 3. And this is going to be one of my binomials. And here 4x over 10, I could divide both of these by 2. And I get 2x over 5. It's going to be the other one of my binomials. So I have here 3 times 2x plus 3 times 2x plus 5 equals 0. Now I want to set each binomial separately equal to 0. So I have here 2x plus 3 equals 0 and 2x plus 5 equals 0. And we work these out. So here I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And I get 2x equals negative 3. Divide by 2. And I get x equals negative 3 over 2, or negative 1 and 1/2. That's one of my x values. And then over here, 2x plus 5 equals 0. Subtract 5 from both sides. I get 2x equals negative 5. Then divide by 2. And I get x equals negative 5 over 2, or negative 2 1/2. Alrighty then. Number 15. So if you take a look at this one, what do you think is going to be the first step that we have to perform here? And we're going to have to FOIL. Before we do anything else here, we're going to have to FOIL. Okay? So we say, okay, 8x times x, that is 8x squared. 8x times 1, that's 8x. 7 times x, that's 7x. And 7 times 1, that's 7, equals 9. We can combine like terms here. We get 8x squared plus 15x plus 7 equals 9. Now we need to set this equation equal to 0, which means we need to subtract 9 from both sides. We get 8x squared plus 15x minus 2 equals 0. And now we can factor. So 8x squared, 15x, negative 2, those cannot be, there's nothing to factor out of that. So let's go ahead and draw our x for our diamond method. Up top here, a times c, which is going to be 8 times negative 2, that's negative 16. Down here, our b value, which is 15. And over here, our 8x, our fraction with the 8x. on top. All right, let's find our denominators. I have two numbers that multiply together to make negative 16. And when you add them, you get 15. Again, this is negative, which means one of them is positive and the other one is negative. And which also means that the difference between the two numbers needs to be 15. So if I do 16 times negative 1, that gives me negative 16, and 16 minus 1 is 15. So that's perfect, right? So over here I'm going to put my negative 1, and over here I'm going to put my 16. Now 8x over negative 1, that's already in simplest form. And over here 8x and 16 can be divided by 8, making this x over 2. And that's going to be my other binomial. All right? So when we factor this, 8x minus 1 times x plus 2 equals 0. Now we set our two equations, our two binomials equal to 0. 8x minus 1 equals 0, and x plus 2 equals 0. Over here, I am going to add 1 to both sides. Get 8x equals 1, and then when I divide by 8, I get 8x equals 1/8. Then over here, x plus 2 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 2. So those are my two solutions. X equals 1/8 and x equals negative 2. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at some real-world examples. So take a look here. I have a little bit here to read, but it's important to go over this. It says a projectile is an object moving through the air without any forces other than the gravity acting on it. The height of a projectile at a time in seconds can be found by using the formula h equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus s. And this part is important, where v is the initial upwards velocity in feet per second, okay? And s is the starting height in feet. The a term of negative 16 accounts for the effect of gravity accelerating the projectile downwards and is the only appropriate value when measuring distance with feet and time in seconds. So whenever you're doing a real-world situation, dealing with this kind of situation, the a value is always negative 16. And I think it's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and work this out. It says when a baseball player hits a baseball into the air, the height of the ball at t seconds after the ball is hit can be modeled with the projectile motion formula, which is this right here, okay? H equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus s, okay? So if the ball is hit at 3 feet off the ground with an upward velocity of 47 feet per second, how long will it take for the ball to hit the ground, assuming it is not caught? Use the equation h equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus s. Find the parameters v and s from the description of the problem. So we take a look at this problem here. Okay, we have here h equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus s. Now we're not going to be able to find t. T is what we're going to have to solve the equation to find, but we need to find v and s. So v is the velocity. So let's write here h equals negative 16t squared, that's going to change, plus, now what's v? Our velocity is 47 feet per second. So this vt becomes 47t plus, and s is our starting point. Where is the ball when it's hit? It's 3 feet off the ground. So s is 3. Okay? And now we need to find the answer to this. So we're talking about the ball hitting the ground if you don't catch it. Where would the ground be? What would the height be on the ground? That would be a height of 0. So now let's go ahead and take this and rewrite this. We're just going to put the 0 on the other side. So it's going to look like this. We have negative 16 t squared plus 47 t plus 3 equals 0. And now we need to go ahead and go about the process of factoring this. So let's do our diamond method. I looked here and I noticed negative 16, 47, and 3, these numbers, there's no a common factor other than 1. Okay, we can go ahead and factor out this negative 1. So let's do that. Negative 1 times, this is going to be now a positive 16t, a negative 47t, and a negative 3. And that equals 0. Okay, so now let's fill in our diamond. We have our A times C. So here's 16 times negative 3, that is negative 48. We have here our B value, which is negative 47. And our 16t squared, right? So that's going to be, our top is going to be 16t over something and 16t over something. All right, so let's find our two factors. So we got two numbers that multiply together to make negative 48 and add together to make negative 47. So that's kind of easy. If you think about 48 times 1 is 48, and 48 minus 1 is 47. And since the b value is negative, we're going to make this a negative 48 here, and we're going to make this a positive 1 here. All right, so we have 16t over 1. That's already in simplest form. And over here, 16t over negative 48. I can divide these by 16, and this gives me t over negative 3. So here are my two binomials. So I have now here negative 1. Let me change colors. Negative 1 times, my first binomial is 16t plus 1 times t minus 3. And that equals 0. We get a little bit more room up here. So then I am going to now set each of these binomials equal to 0. So I have 16t plus 1 equals 0, and I have t minus 3 equals 0. So let's solve this first one here. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and I get 16t equals negative 1. Now, before I continue solving this, let's think logically. We are measuring time in seconds. And as we discussed before in class, you cannot measure time in negative numbers, okay? Because none of us owns a time machine. Therefore, if you see this answer, I'm going to end up doing negative 1 divided by 16. That's going to give me a negative answer. So I know that this answer is not going to make sense. So I'm going to stop working this side out. On this side, I have t minus 3 equals 0. When I add 3 to both sides, I get t equals 3. So this is the answer that's going to make sense because this is a positive amount of time. So my answer is that it takes 3 seconds for the ball to hit the ground. All right, one more example. You might want to try and pause and do this one, and then come back and see if you understand. Okay, so how long does it take a rock to hit the ground if thrown off the edge of a 72-foot tall building roof with an upward velocity of 24 feet per second? So remember that we start off with h equals negative 16 t squared plus vt plus s. Now we need to figure out what v and s are, correct? Well, s is where are we when we first throw the rock? 72, okay? And v is 24. So now this looks like this. H equals negative 16 t squared plus 24t plus 72. That's our equation. And again, we want to find out hitting the ground, and the ground is 0. So we're going to take this and we're going to rewrite this like this. So negative 16 t squared plus 24t plus 72 equals 0, because that's when the rock is going to hit the ground, when the height equals 0. Now, let's take a look here at these terms and see if there's anything we can factor out. We got a negative 16, a positive 24, and a positive 72. Well, we can factor out of these three numbers, all of these numbers are divisible by 8. So in order to take care of this negative and factor by 8, I'm going to factor everything by negative 8. So negative 16t squared divided by negative 8 is going to be 2t squared. 24t divided by negative 8 is going to be negative 3t. And 72 divided by negative 8 is going to be negative 9. And now we need to factor this. So let's go ahead and draw our x for our diamond method. Up here, we're going to do a times c. So 2 times negative 9, that's negative 18. Down here, we're going to do our b value, that's negative 3. And on the left and right, we're going to put 2t over something, 2t over something. All right, so we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to make negative 18 and combine together to make negative 3. Again, this is going to be a positive times a negative. So if I think about the factors of 18, 6 times 3 is 18, and 6 minus 3 is 3. So that fits the bill. And since my b value is negative, my bigger number needs to be the negative. So I'm going to put positive 3 and negative 6. Now over here, 2t over 3. This is already in simplest form. And over here, 2t over negative 6. I could divide both of these by 2, giving me t over negative 3. And these are my two binomials. So now this looks like this. Negative 8 times 2t plus 3 times t minus 3 equals 0. And I'm going to go ahead and set each of these binomials equal to 0. So I have here 2t plus 3 equals 0, and I have t minus 3 equals 0. And then I am going to solve each of these. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And this cancels out, and I get 2t equals negative 3. Now, if you were paying attention to the last example, you're already taking a look at this saying, well, that doesn't make sense, because I cannot have a negative answer when I'm talking about measuring time. So this answer here is not going to make sense. So let's take a look at the next one. T minus 3 equals 0. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and I get t equals 3. And this is a positive number, so this is the answer that's going to make sense. So once again, I know that it's going to take this rock 3 seconds to hit the ground. All right, I know this is a long video, but there was a lot to cover, and I hope you understood this well.